On a crisp spring Saturday evening, the sky displayed a unique glow that can only be seen on such occasions. The Grand Astoria Hotel windows shimmered as if made of polished silver due to the faint sunlight. Before stepping out, I glanced at my reflection in the car window, satisfied with the straight tie, the well-pressed navy suit, and the gleaming shoes. In my inner jacket pocket, nestled in a velvet case, was the Rourke family heirloom watch, brushed steel, gold-edged face adorned with Roman numerals. My grandfather, then my father, had given it to me, and today I was to give it to Brielle, my daughter, my heartbeat, my purpose. Stepping towards the reception gate, I rehearsed various ways of presenting it to her. A part of our story, I might say, or perhaps simply, for your next chapter. I was unsure which would be more fitting. It had taken me days to decide whether to bring it along. I desired the moment to be perfect, memorable, and incontrovertible. As I visualized her reaction upon seeing it, a warm smile crossed my face. A young man, approximately 22, in a black vest and earpiece, stood guard at the guest list table. His eagerness was palpable. He requested my name, to which I obliged promptly. I am Malcolm Rourke. He perused through a digital list on his tablet, exhibiting an air of bored efficiency that made me feel the gravity of the situation. His brow furrowed, he tapped the screen again and looked up with an expression of polite concern, ready to impart unfavorable news. "I'm afraid your name isn't here, sir." I offered a casual smile, assuming it was merely a typo. "It should be. Malcolm Rourke, father of the bride." He scrutinized the screen once more. "There's a Mrs. Cariss Rourke and an additional guest listed, but no Malcolm Rourke. Are you certain you are SVP'd?" I laughed lightly, attempting to maintain my composure, though the atmosphere grew heavier around me. I had paid for the event. "Believe me, I am SVP'd." It was then that the sound of high heels clicking echoed through the room. Pearls dangling at her neckline, a white silk shawl draped across her shoulders, as if she'd stepped off the pages of a fashion magazine. "Cariss, my wife, momentarily." She approached, scanning me like I was an item to be discarded. Her lipstick was crimson, but her smile was icier than any greeting the usher could provide. "Were you under the impression that you were invited?" she asked, tilting her head. "Uninvited guests aren't permitted." I didn't flinch due to not hearing her, but because the words came swiftly and forcefully in the silent gap between us. The usher shuffled uneasily, avoiding eye contact with me. Cariss acknowledged him with a nod, implying, "I've got this," before directing her gaze toward the grand ballroom, causing her train to rustle as if asserting its own importance. I chose not to follow her. I remained still. "Pardon me, sir," the usher said, his voice strained with regret. "You must make room for me to pass." I moved a few paces back, not retreating from the hotel, but distancing myself from the self that felt I still belonged here. I stole a glance at my wristwatch. The plush casing seemed diminished now, like an unintended burden I shouldn't have on me here. From within, the soft strumming of the quartet echoed, followed by laughter and the sound of champagne glasses chiming together. My daughter was in there. The little girl who used to wear my socks as gloves and call me Papa had lost her two front teeth. She was the one I'd taught to ride a bike and picked up from every sleepover. That same child asked me to braid her hair during middle school when her real mother was too preoccupied. I raised Brielle as if she were my own flesh and blood, more so than actual kin. I was present for each milestone. I paid for her braces, her ballet shoes, her college dorm furniture. I was the one who stayed up with her to help revise college essays, even when I had work the next day. I was the one who consoled her when she cried on her 16th birthday after her father Anthony sent her an empty card. She ripped it up and wept into my shirt. I recall telling her, "I won't abandon you." And I didn't until tonight. Because Cariss wasn't merely being vindictive. This wasn't a fleeting act of meanness. This had been deliberate, arranged. She hadn't accidentally left me off the guest list. She had written me out of the narrative entirely. I glanced back once, through the towering glass doors, where the crystal chandeliers danced like fire trapped in ice. In that ballroom, Brielle was being honored and spun around. Somewhere in there, someone else was probably taking my place, a position I'd occupied for 26 years. I returned the watch to my pocket, not because I wanted to keep it, but because it no longer belonged to someone who regarded me as a stranger. A valet brushed past, hardly noticing me. It was then that I realized I had become unseen. Cariss didn't acknowledge me. Brielle didn't either. Perhaps she hadn't either. I pondered dialing Brielle merely to hear her voice, to assure her. But I hesitated. If she truly desired my presence, wouldn't she have noticed the omission of my name? I ambled back towards my car at a leisurely pace. Not agitated, not shattered. A feeling deeper than that. A feeling conclusive. The engine rumbled to life, yet I lingered before departing. The quiet enveloped me, filling the voids. No longer was I Malcolm Rourke, husband of Cariss, father of the bride. Now I was something else, a blend of recollection and legend. They had cast me out. So now I would demonstrate the essence of vanishing. I once assumed love was crafted like a dwelling, commencing with a foundation, layer upon layer, bonded by vows and adorned with shared experiences. For 26 years, Cariss and I inhabited what I perceived as our home. The walls echoed with laughter, the drawers harbored schemes, and corners were laden with years' worth of human messiness, a blend of optimism and imperfection. Yet amidst the annual celebrations and late-night disagreements, the wall paint began to splinter. I didn't realize how I had blended into obscurity until the night she labeled me an outsider. Cariss wasn't always malicious. There was a time when she would brighten upon my arrival at the door. We first crossed paths at a jazz bar on Clark Street, a dimly lit joint where the saxophone played incessantly and cocktails were overpoweringly strong. She donned a navy wrap dress, shared jokes with a companion, and I recall thinking we could construct something together. She exuded an air of sharpness, elegance, and invulnerability. Unbeknownst to me then, that final attribute would foretell our future. When we tied the knot, Brielle was just shy of 3, a whirlwind of curls and curiosity. Her father, Anthony, vanished as quickly as spilled wine, swift and staining. No reason, no farewell. Just gone. I never sought to fill his role. Instead, I consistently appeared and persisted. It was me who soothed her to sleep, instructed her on how to tie her shoelaces, stayed awake through numerous nights, assisting her in constructing the crooked science fair volcano in 5th grade. We sculpted pumpkins together, danced in the kitchen to vintage soul records. I endured countless viewings of frozen movies merely for her laughter. That was our rhythm, our unspoken agreement. She referred to me as Dad without prompting. I didn't crave anything more than that. People often told me how fortunate I was that Cariss welcomed me into their lives. What they failed to grasp was, I didn't ask for permission to enter. I constructed the very staircase that led to the door. I appeared when Anthony did not. I remained when no one else did. I loved her daughter when it was challenging, tiring, and difficult. Somehow, our bond, once strong, became obscured. It wasn't always this way. Even 5 years ago, we still felt like a family. Brielle frequently sent me random images that evoked our shared jokes, and often called for guidance. Dad, should I accept the internship now or wait until the end of the semester? Or Dad, what kind of wine would be suitable to bring to dinner with Marcus's family? Marcus, despite being a good man, always greeted me formally. I believed he recognized me. I thought they all did. However, Cariss transformed. I'm not certain when it began. Perhaps it was around the time Brielle gained admission to college, and Cariss felt compelled to regain control. Maybe it was jealousy. I made more money than she did. I handled the finances, paid off the mortgage, and set up our retirement. I never used that as leverage, but perhaps she secretly resented me for it. Or maybe it was Anthony. He resurfaced when Brielle turned 20, sending a half-hearted birthday card and promising to reconnect. I found the unopened envelope in the trash. She hadn't read it. She alleged it was so, but afterward, something shifted. Cariss began saying things like, I assume you know she's not yours, not out of anger, casually, as if a jab with a knife hidden within. I would dismiss it, not because it didn't wound, but because reacting would make it real, and I wasn't prepared for that reality. So I suppressed it. Then came the alteration. All of a sudden, during family events, Cariss would narrate stories where I was excluded. In those tales, Anthony's name was inserted as if he had been present at the first recital, the first heartbreak. I remained seated at those tables, listening to history being rewritten in real time. And Brielle, she did not correct her. That was what grated on me the most. Perhaps she didn't observe it. Or perhaps silence was simpler. I convinced myself they were just words. I convinced myself love was demonstrated through actions. But love devoid of acknowledgement, that's how one becomes a phantom. When Brielle started arranging the wedding, I was fully committed. I took care of the costs, not out of obligation, but out of affection. A loving gesture. I met with the florist, scouted venues, and arranged for the caterer. Cariss didn't argue, instead engaging in indirect discussions. Discussions that excluded me. Meetings about which I learned only later. The invitations were sent, and when I asked to see them, she dismissed me with a wave and said, "Taken care of." Then came that night at the Grand Astoria. The scene replayed over and over in my mind. Her words, her lips forming stranger as if rehearsed, as if saved for just that moment, the fatal blow. It didn't matter that I had paid for the venue, that I had bought Brielle her first car, or that I had stayed up all night by her bedside during her high school flu. It didn't matter that I was the one she cried to when she didn't get into Columbia. All of it became insignificant in a mere instant. Driving home from the hotel, my grip firm on the steering wheel, yet my thoughts shattering, I navigated past markers once shared. Our preferred coffee shop, the park where Brielle mastered skating, the bookstore where Cariss and I perused unbought poetry, all now felt like preserved artifacts. Static. Displayed. Inaccessible. In the kitchen, tie loose, sleeves bared, I poured a drink and fixed my gaze on the vacant chair where I used to read the paper, the corridor that once echoed with Brielle's running footsteps seeking hugs. This was still my home, but it no longer felt like mine. Merely walls remained now, a dwelling place where memory had been evicted. It was then I realized I no longer belonged in their future. Perhaps I hadn't for some time. 2 nights before the wedding, I found myself in the kitchen, dicing onions for an unwanted stir-fry, trying to suppress the deafening silence that had overgrown the house like mold. Prepared a meal for me, Cariss, and Brielle. However, only one plate was consumed. Cariss was confined to the guest room, while Brielle seemed absent. No response to my messages in 3 days. The last message was about looking forward to the rehearsal dinner. No acknowledgement. I waited for a response on my phone on the counter, but none came. The following morning, Cariss unexpectedly appeared in the mirror behind me while I brushed my teeth, fiddling with her earrings as if I wasn't there. Her voice was sharp yet subtle, like a scalpel concealed within velvet. "You need not attend the rehearsal dinner." I halted mid-brush. "Why?" "It's only for the girls," she replied casually. "And their true kin." I hesitated as my hand gripped the toothbrush. I had assumed the rehearsal was for the entire wedding party. She smirked and patted her hair. "Well, you know how customs change." I chuckled. An abrupt, unsolicited sound escaped, followed by my question, "Real family?" She didn't respond, instead striding away with her heels clicking against the tile, leaving behind a lingering scent of perfume, reminiscent of an unwanted conclusion in an argument I hadn't agreed to. The phrase reverberated more powerfully than her footsteps. Real family, as if I was a temporary fill-in who outstayed my welcome. A bit player and a life I had helped fashion. I endeavored not to let it affect me. I told myself she was under pressure due to this wedding overwhelming everyone. But I wasn't oblivious. I recognized the indications. I merely clung to the hope that Brielle wouldn't participate in it. However, hope can be treacherous when it morphs into denial. That night, I sat on the porch with a beer in one hand and the wedding schedule in the other. I had printed it out weeks ago, color-coded, every detail meticulously planned like a political campaign. This was my method of operation. I was always the strategist, the orchestrator, the man people trusted to maintain order. I skimmed through it once more, trying to comprehend the fresh guidelines emerging around me. My phone eventually vibrated, showing a message from Brielle. "We'll meet at the wedding, Father." There was no apology, only those 9 words. The word father, though, struck like a wave and a dagger simultaneously. I remained seated, fixedly gazing at the screen long after it dimmed. I wished to think that word retained meaning, that she genuinely meant it. However, as I mulled it over in my mind, it felt more like a convention, an ease, a marker in a tale she was already rewriting. I could sense it unfolding, chapter by chapter. I recalled the night Marcus proposed to her. She contacted me first. Not Cariss, not her best friend. Me. Her voice resonated through the phone, jubilant and radiant. Dad, he did it. Exactly as I said, on the Ferris wheel. Tears welled up. Not because I was losing her, but because she still recognized me. Because she'd granted me access. We conversed for an hour that night. Despite his initial hesitation to seek approval, Marcus made amends in his own reserved manner. He was a courteous individual, possibly overly so. The type who would send handwritten thank you notes yet shy away during intimate moments. He consistently expressed gratitude for assistance, funding, and backing. However, his kin, particularly his parents, never took to me. They were traditional aristocrats, accustomed to hosting grand events and radiating disapproval like cologne. Each encounter with them felt akin to an unsuccessful job interview. At the engagement dinner, Marcus' mother whispered to Cariss, "I'm glad Brielle will have her father escort her down the aisle. It carries symbolism." Cariss chose not to contest this. I endured it, much like numerous other instances that evening. Yet I smiled, delivered the toast, and covered the expenses. I did so because I held the belief that love is demonstrated by showing up, not seeking recognition. Despite God knowing my presence, I was there even when the room felt icy, and my name seemed to vanish from the narrative like a faint mark on an outdated receipt. 2 nights preceding the wedding, I found myself revisiting old messages from Brielle, those that said, "Thank you for everything," with hearts and exclamation marks. There was one from her freshman year of college. "I miss your pancakes. Love you, Dad." I kept that one, still do. That night, instead of the rehearsal dinner, I visited the lake, the one where we used to fish together when she was young. She never valued the fish. It was the soothing sound of water that appealed to her. She would often scatter breadcrumbs at ducks, questioning why they never became full. Alone on that same bench, as the sun hid behind hills, I pondered over our journey. I wondered how a man could sacrifice time, money, affection, years, and yet not be welcome to a moment he played a part in crafting. I didn't shed tears. It is not easy for me to do so. A void gnawed at my heart, leaving a silent sorrow behind. The type that doesn't burst into tears, but seeps into your bones and alters your posture. Upon returning home, Cariss was tucked in bed, her phone bright with group chats and notifications. I paused in the doorway, watching her scroll, chuckling at messages from others. Not a single glance did she cast my way. I yearned to inquire about it all. Why this change? When did I cease being family as she defines it? But I knew she wouldn't offer a genuine response. So I walked the hallway to my office, shut the door, and for the first time in years, locked it. The envelope on the kitchen counter glowed softly under the morning light, its ivory square slightly tilted to reveal the gold embossing on one corner: Grand Astoria Hotel, Wedding Division. It caught my eye as I poured coffee. Grabbed it, anticipating my name within. A tiny portion of me grinned, thinking, at last. The formal invitation. The confirmation long awaited. Carefully slid a finger beneath the flap, avoiding any tears. Still believing in maintaining order, especially regarding sacred items. Yet, when I withdrew the invitation, my smile failed to materialize. It crumbled instantly. Mrs. Cariss Rourke and guest. No Mr., no Malcolm, no father of the bride. Just my spouse, if she still is, and a generic +1. An auxiliary, as if whoever she brought mattered more than I did. Pondered it for a prolonged moment, blinked once, twice, again and again, searching for reason in it. Perhaps it was an oversight, a typographical error, one of those blunders that occur when you entrust tasks to autopilot mode. But even as I convinced myself thus, I knew differently. The script on the outer envelope was recognizable. Cariss's elegant loops. I personally handled them all. I fiddled with the envelope in my hands, then glanced at the pile in the corner. Cariss had left these on the sideboard by the door several days ago, intending to send them out with the mail. I hadn't given it a thought back then, but now I recall who they were for. Trina, her cousin, our neighbor, and even Wendy from her yoga class. Each addressed formally Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so. Full names. Full respect. I opened the drawer next to the fridge and retrieved the list I had helped compile. The guest spreadsheet we had collaborated on over wine one evening 6 months ago. My name was once there, inputted by me. I re-examined the column again. Cariss Rourke was listed as a guest. Beside her, the spot that had once held my name had been erased. It wasn't an oversight. It was intentional. I found myself seated at the table, the invitation in front of me as if it might someday illuminate an answer. The coffee grew cold beside me, unconsumed. Pondering a visit to the bedroom, facing her seemed the right course. Yet, what could I say that she hadn't already disregarded? What reply might she provide that wouldn't wound us further? Instead, I extracted the velvet box containing the wristwatch once more. Opening and closing it, I traced my thumb across its gilded surface. It wasn't merely a timepiece, but history itself. My father adorned it at my high school graduation, while my grandfather wore it at his retirement party. It wasn't purchased, it was inherited, gifted, not earned. I had kept it in anticipation of a significant moment, and this day was meant to be that one. Brielle's wedding. The day I'd give her more than a keepsake, the day I'd recall her origin. Yet it was obvious now I wasn't part of her future destination. Still echoing in my mind was her question from a year ago. "You'll walk me down the aisle, won't you, Dad?" It seemed as if she had asked casually, like asking for dry cleaning pickup. But that instance held immense significance for me. I nodded, speechless due to the emotion constricting my throat. Now I questioned if she even recalled saying it. Later that afternoon, Cariss strolled through the house carelessly, as if nothing had altered. She donned a coral dress, brushing her knees in sandals that tapped lightly on the hardwood. She hummed a tune while moving from room to room, tossing keys, checking lipstick, replying to texts. I remained seated, clutching the envelope as if it were a hurt. "You've addressed this incorrectly," I said, to which she paused near the door, tilting her head. "What's this invitation to your wedding?" "It's addressed to Cariss Rourke and guest." She offered a quick, slightly forced smile. "You reside here. Why do you require an invitation? Everyone else received one, including their names, even Wendy." Cariss nonchalantly shrugged, picking up her bag. "It's not a concern, Malcolm." "It is for me," I replied, my voice dropping. She scrutinized me then closely. Not guilt or defensiveness, but rather the polished indifference she wore when she no longer cared. "Don't turn this into your issue," she cautioned, her tone gentle and crisp. "This is Brielle's day." I saw her depart, the door clicking shut behind her like a period. It was then that I understood I wasn't meant to be part of this storyline. I was being erased, and the ink had already dried. I stepped into the study and pulled out an old photo cabinet. There, amidst many others, I searched for one specific image: Brielle at 10 years old, sitting on my shoulders at the state fair. Her visage adorned like a butterfly, my grip securing her limbs for balance. We both chuckled heartily. Pure, expansive, unguarded delight filled the air. For years, that photograph had been preserved in a frame on my desk. Yet, upon reaching the shelf, it was absent. I scrutinized the next one, then the bookshelf, then the table beside the couch, nowhere to be found. All the other photos remained: Cariss with her college companions, Brielle at a piano recital with her mother. However, I had vanished from the frames, as if someone had deliberately obliterated me by hand. I slumped back onto the couch, allowing the realization to settle in. One might think the most detrimental act is departure, but that's not accurate. The real cruelty lies in being encompassed by individuals who maintain you merely for convenience or inertia, yet systematically expunge you from matters of significance. That form of solitude is profound, a more debilitating betrayal. I delicately refolded the invitation and replaced it in its envelope. Later, I placed it in the drawer with my extra house keys and checkbook, not as a permanent storage, but to etch the moment everything crystallized into my memory. They weren't merely excluding me from the rehearsal, they were altering the narrative. I was no longer part of it. Upon informing Miles about this, he almost spilled his coffee. Our usual hangout was a quaint corner cafe near his office, where mugs were mismatched and regulars conversed like kin. Truthfully, I hadn't intended to share my predicament with anyone, but the words tumbled out like a clandestine admission, quiet and slightly embarrassed. They refused me entry, Miles. My name was absent from the guest list. He looked at me in disbelief across the table, his brow furrowed as if he had misunderstood. What on earth do you mean you weren't on the guest list? You paid for the wedding. I understand. You covered the venue costs, flowers, catering, and even hired a string quartet. I know. You were sitting here silently while Malcolm, what on earth are you doing? You should have caused an uproar instead. Miles leaned forward, his voice intensifying. You didn't respond immediately. There was too much turbulence in your mind to hear yourself think, let alone respond. But eventually, the truth that mattered to you surfaced. The purpose isn't to make them see me, and I've had enough of trying to make others acknowledge my existence. Miles fell silent, his jaw tightening as he absorbed this. He shook his head, mumbling something inaudible, before finally saying, "You are a better man than I am." At that point, I was on the verge of flipping the whole table. I offered him a sorrowful smile. Perhaps, or perhaps you haven't been broken yet. The fact is, I didn't leave that gate due to weakness or shock. I left because I was finished. There's a distinction. Avoiding strength would have meant remaining there, imploring to be let in, arguing my case as if on trial for loving excessively. But I wasn't standing trial. I had already been condemned, already expunged. So I opted for dignity. That evening, I returned home and prepared a bag. No grand departure. No suitcases thrown down the stairs, no commotion, no slammed doors. Just a leather duffel, the same one we used on our honeymoon in Maui. I packed it with necessities, a few shirts, clean trousers, my sketchbook, the watch. I took my passport, not because I had somewhere to go right away, but because I appreciated the notion of choices, of movement, of possibly, at last, living for myself. Cariss wasn't home. She was likely still at the Grand Astoria, basking in the radiance of the pre-wedding dinner. I envisioned her laughing, effortlessly charming Marcus' parents, positioning herself in every spotlight as she usually did. What I admired about her was how she could enter a room and dominate it without even trying. However, over the course of years, that radiance ceased to illuminate me, instead burning me. Before closing the bag, I took one last stroll through the house. It wasn't out of sentimentality, but rather to let go gracefully. I halted at Brielle's former bedroom, the one we had painted lavender when she turned 12 because she believed purple aided her thought process. Her trophies were still arranged on the shelf above her desk: gymnastics, debate team, spelling bee. Most of them I had witnessed her win. She used to shine at me from the stage as if I was the one who made her stand there. But that was years ago. Now I wasn't even permitted inside the premises. I ventured down the hallway, my fingers grazing the framed image of our family trip to Charleston. Brielle had just completed high school. Instead of hosting a grand celebration, we opted for the trip as she expressed her preference for memories over commotion. Memories of us strolling along the harbor, her resting her head on my shoulder when fatigue took hold. Those moments once held significance. Now they seemed like someone else's tale. Upon reaching the front door, I left the house key on the hallway table, not out of finality, though a part of me questioned if that might be the case, but because I no longer wished to bear keys for a place devoid of familiarity. A stranger requires no keys. They knock and wait to be invited in, yet I ceased knocking. I climbed into my car and drove aimlessly, guided by miles and streetlights. The city extended its vast, unfeeling expanse, disregarding the pain in my heart. In time, I parked at a small roadside motel, the kind with intermittent signs and carpets reeking of old smoke. It was modest, but it offered solace from the din. That night, tranquility seemed like opulence. I seated myself on the brink of the bed and extracted the envelope I'd arranged weeks beforehand. Labeled Cariss, as a precaution should boundaries be overstepped. It served as more than a caution. It was meant to be a safeguard, one she'd never need to read if she hadn't indeed transgressed. Inside, there was a solitary piece of paper. No threats, no malice, just a straightforward letter. You've made your decision. Now I'll make mine. I harbored affection for you and her, but I refused to inhabit a life I aided in creating without an invitation. I stowed the envelope in the motel safe together with a flash drive containing my legal documents, items I hoped would remain untouched. Bank account alterations, trust amendments, time-sensitive transactions waiting for that last trigger. People often perceive quietude as submission. Yet, sometimes quietude is a surgical instrument. Sometimes, the most impactful sound in a room is the one that never has to be uttered. Miles messaged me again the following morning. A solitary line only. Despite your belief that it wasn't about money, they will sense it somehow. 3 weeks prior to the wedding, a change began in me, not sudden or dramatic, but subtle. A hint in my side, a flicker in my stomach, a persistent yet soft voice saying, "Beware." I recognized the signs: my name being omitted from things, Cariss's dismissive looks, Brielle's unexpected distance. Consequently, like any man who feels unwelcome in his own family when the ground starts shaking, I prepared for the inevitable upheaval. The preparation started with the credit cards. Primarily, most of the wedding expenses were charged to a platinum card under my name. I had taken care of the venue deposit, catering, prepaid honeymoon package in Tuscany, floral design consultation, thinking that's what a father should do. Or so I thought, until I realized I was no longer a father. In days when Brielle used to consult me about gold hues suitable for tablecloths, I found myself seated at my desk one afternoon, with sunlight filtering through the blinds and forming soft bands of light. Initiating phone calls ensued, not for cancellation, but to alter payment terms instead. Postponement, not annulment, something less conspicuous, harder to reverse. First, I reached out to the venue manager, Jerome, a meticulous man who had previously commended my diligence. I informed him of the need to revise the payment structure, keeping final charges on hold. Not a cancellation, simply a delay. Just an accounting audit, I explained. Jerome didn't inquire further. People seldom do when one speaks calmly and dons a suit, even during off hours. Next came the caterer, followed by the booking of the honeymoon suite and ocean view villa with a private infinity pool near Florence. The reservation remained valid, but I inserted a provisional clause via my concierge service. Approval needed from me 72 hours prior to check-in. If not confirmed, the reservation would be voided automatically. No words exchanged. Effortless, without drama, simply vanished. Then I contacted my attorney, William Ansley, an old companion with aged eyes. We attended the same university, and he had observed my life progress in quiet stages throughout the years. He didn't inquire about current affairs. Instead, he listened. It was this ability of his that made him dangerous. He could discern truth without needing a backstory. I expressed the desire to revisit the trust, for Brielle's sake. Had I decided to enact the estrangement clause? There was hesitation before answering. I desired a written confirmation, not theoretical assurances. He didn't object. We amended the clause. Initially, it was concealed within fine print, a safety measure crafted during a challenging period with Cariss when I was ensuring Brielle's financial security regardless of our relationship's state. The clause was straightforward. Should Brielle formally end our relationship, either through legal means or clear rejection, the disbursement plan would halt permanently. She wouldn't forfeit everything. I wasn't unkind. However, the complete distribution of her trust, which included funds for investments or future home down payments, would become inaccessible, like an unopenable safe, and it was now active. Not out of malice, but out of clarity. They believed I wasn't observant, but I continued to write checks just to feel indispensable. They overlooked the fact that I am a builder by nature, and every builder knows when a structure is at risk, you don't wait for it to crumble. You reinforce. You save what's important. The following day, I went to the bank. Discreetly, without an appointment, I spoke with a private banking manager, Serena, who recognized me before I identified myself. We discussed the automatic debits and wedding withdrawals. The legislation Cariss had passed, including one for a luxury shuttle bus, another for personalized embossed napkins, and a third for a harpist from Napa, all charged to my account, all under my name. I made Serena divert the alerts. From Cariss's email to mine, from her phone number to my backup line. I didn't inform Cariss. It wasn't necessary. The performance should continue. The arrangements should proceed. Because the stage, the lights, the music, it was all constructed on a framework I could dismantle with a single touch. And I had set the timer. A sequence of automated actions, fine-tuned through the online interface, concealed behind an additional layer of passwords, not for malicious purposes, just enough to draw their attention, just enough to demonstrate what happens when the person they thought was merely a doormat decides to take control. I wasn't doing this out of vengeance. I was doing it because they had already defined who I was to them. Optional. If you leave a man alienated in his own inheritance, don't be taken aback when he starts locking doors you didn't think he could access. The watch, meant for Brielle, lay undisturbed in its box within the drawer. For days, I hadn't even glanced at it. My plan was to present it to her after the ceremony, once everyone else was enjoying champagne and dancing under chandeliers. I'd envisioned giving it to her, whispering, "This has been waiting 3 generations for you." Yet, how does one pass down a legacy to someone who no longer considers you kin? One evening, I found myself gazing at my reflection in the mirror, holding the watch. Instead of seeing a damaged man, I saw a man who had ceased to justify those who wouldn't accommodate him. The watch went back into the drawer. Not due to lack of love, but as love doesn't entail giving everything away when one is considered worthless. Let them celebrate their wedding. Let them toast with wine and share pictures, pretending I was an uninvited guest. They had their plans, but now so do I. I can't say what compelled me to glance at the clock. Perhaps it was an instinct, or perhaps the ominous rumble in my chest, a feeling that something you have created is about to crumble. It was 3:47 p.m., precisely 12 minutes past the time of the ceremony. I envisioned the ballroom, the floral decorations, the quartet positioned beneath the crystal chandelier. I imagined Marcus standing at the altar with his hands clasped in front of him, both nervous and proud, and Cariss somewhere near the front row, reveling in attention like sunlight. I wasn't present, not because I didn't wish to be, but because they made the choice for me. Thus, I distanced myself, but I did not vanish. I spent my morning strolling along the waterfront near my new apartment, sipping coffee from a paper cup and observing sailboats glide leisurely across the lake as if they knew their destination. By noon, I found myself back at my desk with my laptop active, watching events unfold according to my prearranged plan. It wasn't sensational or destructive, it was corrective. At 2:58 p.m., the catering company issued a notification about an unpaid balance before service could commence. The payment on record, my card, had been put on hold. 2 minutes later, the luxury transportation service reported a delay due to an overdue invoice. By this point, Cariss, probably seated at the ceremony, would have been oblivious to the impending issues. The dominoes wouldn't start falling for her until 3:09 p.m. when the quartet sent a brief, apologetic message to the event coordinator, informing them that their final payment hadn't cleared yet, halting their performance. Control often seems loud, but in truth, it lies in the details. It's about knowing which strings to tug at the right moments. By 3:17, the venue's assistant manager, a fellow named Brian, who was clueless about what was brewing, approached Cariss Medill. I had phoned the venue the previous night, verifying the cancellation clause. Unless my secret code was used, the remaining payment wouldn't be made. Jerome, the manager, had hesitated. "Mr. Rourke, are you certain?" he'd inquired. Affirmatively, I responded. Now, Brian stood next to Cariss, whispering into her ear, his clipboard shaking slightly. Though I wasn't present, I could visualize it clearly. I had rehearsed this scene numerous times in my mind. The way her eyebrows would rise, the way her lips would purse into that rigid line that always preceded an outburst. She looked toward the organizer, then at the quartet, now standing stiffly in silence. The elegantly dressed guests would start to murmur. "Brielle, I visualized her in the bridal suite, standing solo before a mirror, holding a quivering bouquet. Her veil securely fastened, makeup impeccable, preparing to proceed towards a man who cherished her. Yet the music remained unplayed, the anticipation unspoken. Only bewilderment, static, and delay filled the air, halting the ceremony. I calculated it to the second, not with the intention of spoiling the wedding, but merely to leave a trace. A subtle hint that I mattered, that one cannot simply erase years of a man's presence without him ceasing to subsidize his own erasure. The phone on my desk sounded off, first once, then twice. Unknown callers. Then Cariss's name blinked. Then again. I ignored it, letting it ring. It buzzed again, this time a voicemail. I opted not to listen. Instead, I opened the drawer beside me and retrieved the old photo of us, Brielle and I, from when she was 9. The one I had given to Cariss in an envelope the night I departed. I'd made a duplicate for myself, a keepsake, if you will. In her pink princess gown, minus a front tooth, she clung tightly to me, as if I was the only solidity in her world. In that photo, she seemed like a girl who fully relied on me. Perhaps she did, at one point. However, trust, much like glass, doesn't always splinter in a single crack. Often, it cracks silently until eventually it can no longer hold anything together. At exactly 3:39, the honeymoon suite in Tuscany became available. The concierge confirmed the booking. Reservation canceled due to payment default. The wedding planner, unfortunate soul, would probably inform them later, post-ceremony, if there even was a ceremony. No celebratory toast with champagne. No delightful treats with chilled strawberries and rose petals on the bed. Merely a hollow resonance of what had been envisioned, based on the belief that I'd always be present to finance their fantasy. Back at Grand Astoria, I visualized Marcus's parents whispering tersely, glancing at their watches. Without a doubt, his mother regarded Cariss with suppressed disapproval. When used skillfully, silence can be as loud as thunder. It wasn't until about 4 p.m. that the climax occurred. I had carefully scheduled it to respond to a remote trigger, a text message from my secondary line to an automated server. The trust fund protocol was activated. Not the complete lockdown, just a notification sent to the account manager and my lawyer. Conditions of estrangement were detected. Freeze command initiated. It was methodical, efficient, undeniable. This was not what Cariss had expected. She thought excluding me from social circles wouldn't affect financial systems. However, I had constructed this, years ago, in silence. I set up safeguards, not out of suspicion, but out of love. I wanted Brielle to be shielded from the turmoil that sometimes arises between adults. I never imagined I would need it for my own protection. The quietness in my apartment was starkly different from the commotion I imagined taking place within the Grand Astoria ballroom. It was immaculate, peaceful. I relaxed in my chair as sunlight illuminated the wooden flooring. For the first time in months, my chest felt unburdened. Eventually, Brielle would inevitably ask the question everyone had been avoiding: where is Dad? Not Malcolm. Not Mr. Rourke. Dad. Perhaps, if the music didn't play and the petals didn't float down, she'd recall who had always been present, and who had always chosen her. Not from duty, not because it was convenient, but because she belonged to me, even when no one seemed ready to acknowledge it anymore. I didn't do this to hurt her. I did it to remind her. For the first time since receiving the letter with no sender, I felt complete. I don't believe Cariss immediately read the letter. Typical of her, she likely put the envelope in her purse, acting unfazed while hiding her turmoil, and then resumed her seat as if nothing was falling apart beneath her. I had observed that smile too many years to discern its hint when it began to tremble. She often misjudged me because I rarely raised my voice. To her, tranquility equated to weakness. What she failed to grasp was that quietness conceals sharpness. Eventually, I displayed mine. It was hours afterwards when she probably discovered it. Perhaps in the car, perhaps later at home in the stillness, following the cessation of the turmoil. The message wasn't extended. I penned it carefully, with meticulous patience, on the verso of that ancient photograph, the one featuring me and Brielle from her 9th birthday. We were elegantly attired, acting out make-believe after a father-daughter dance at her school. She wore a tiara, I wore a tux. Her gaze toward me mirrored the placement of stars in the sky. That night she dozed off in the back seat with glitter in her hair and my hands still clasped in hers. I scrutinized that photograph for a protracted period before flipping it over and inscribing 7 words with indelible ink. If only outsiders are excluded, so is aid. I didn't pen it out of rage. I wrote it out of honesty. That was the stipulation they imposed, the expense of being cast aside, of standing at the threshold of my daughter's wedding and being told I wasn't welcome. Cariss had delineated that boundary with a smile. Brielle, perhaps unconsciously, crossed over it. The second page in the envelope contained a more formal explanation, a typed version of the active trust clause. The section detailing estrangement conditions and subsequent repercussions was underscored in yellow. I left no room for misinterpretation. As soon as they deemed me not kin, the trust would become inactive. Not as retribution. Rather, mirroring what had already been set forth, I was no longer part of the foundation. In that moment, as the caterer wrapped leftovers, the string quartet silently packed up their instruments, and the venue manager fielded an endless series of calls trying to justify the still lit yet fading magic. I was left alone in my apartment, my phone lying face down on the table, vibrating sporadically like a fly trapped against a closed window pane. I didn't check my messages then, not because of any theatrics, but because I knew what they would contain. Anxiety, blame, possibly even remorse-laden apologies. At this point, it held no significance. The opportunity to speak had passed. They remained silent when it mattered. I was only mirroring their actions. My final action that night was to close everything down. I opened my banking app and revoked access to our joint accounts. I halted all automated payments related to the wedding. I shut down the account I had consistently funded for Brielle's post-college expenses, an account she never had to worry about. Now it was closed too, not because I wished her pain, but because I couldn't safeguard someone who viewed my presence as unnecessary and my absence as insignificant. I also deactivated all notifications. My phone fell silent. There was a peculiar peace in that quietness. It wasn't lonely or void, simply serene in a way I hadn't experienced in years. It echoed the sound of freedom, of making a choice for myself after spending decades as someone else's dependable backdrop. I lit a candle, not for atmosphere or emotion, but because it carried the scent of cedar wood and made the room seem more like a home I selected. I poured a drink of scotch, the fine bottle I had been saving for a festive occasion I thought I would share, and took my seat at the kitchen table, taking deep breaths, allowing everything to settle. They were situated at opposite ends of the city. A heated discussion ensued, with each party attempting to decipher what had transpired, accusations being passed around. The scene felt reminiscent of a play. As Cariss demanded explanations, Brielle seemed bewildered and possibly heartbroken. Marcus's family appeared rigid and furious, questioning the kind of turmoil they'd become part of. However, it wasn't turmoil. It was retribution. A few hours later, my phone rang once more. This time, there was no vibration. It actually rang a genuine call from Marcus. I fixedly gazed at the name for about a minute before responding. Malcolm, his tone was guarded and tense, not yet showing anger. I simply wanted to express my regret. I slouched in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Why now? He questioned. I wasn't aware, Marcus replied. I swear I wasn't aware. About the trust, about the catering, about everything. I thought you were going to be present. I clarified. You mistakenly assumed that. There was a moment of quiet on his end, followed by Brielle being unaware as well. I believe she's coming to understand Cariss's actions. I remained silent. He didn't demand an explanation. He didn't press for specifics. Perhaps he understood better. Perhaps he perceived what Brielle hadn't, the price of excluding a man and expecting him to continue constructing the house. She wants to speak with you, Marcus mentioned, but she's uncertain how. I inhaled deeply. Inform her that I'm attentive. When she's prepared. Thank you, he said, softly and gratefully. I ended the call without a farewell. I wasn't being rude. I simply didn't want to feign we were more than we currently are. I acknowledged his reaching out, his effort. Yet, his efforts now weren't identical to standing firm when it truly mattered. Still, it was more than I anticipated. I replaced the phone and surveyed the room. The candle continued to flicker. My scotch was only halfway consumed. The quiet still enveloped me like a comforting coat I hadn't recognized I needed. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel insignificant. I recognized my self-value again and departed 2 days after our wedding. There was no spectacle, no farewell. I didn't pen a note on the counter or linger for one last glance at the life I once knew. I had already surveyed that life thoroughly at a ceremony where I wasn't welcomed, amidst a family that beamed without me, from a spouse who labeled me as foreign and ensured I felt like an outsider. I waited until late morning, giving Cariss time to depart, likely attempting to restore the remnants of her special day. I could visualize her touring the venue with her practiced smile, attempting to normalize the disintegration as simple setbacks. She would spin it, as she always did. I claimed my possessions, enough to fill my SUV. A few suits, my cherished coffee mug, made by Brielle in art class at age 7, with an off-center blue glaze and Dad etched into the side like a stamp. Some unaltered photos, my books, my sketches. I abandoned the rest, the furniture, the decorations, the tableware, the carefully selected lifestyle. She could retain everything. I no longer desired any part of it. It was merely an empty husk of something once filled. The apartment I discovered wasn't expansive, but sufficient. One bedroom, bare bricks, a water view if I balanced precariously on the minuscule balcony. It was the initial space I chose solely for myself in many years. No concessions, no dull color palettes to accommodate others. I purchased a petite navy couch, a wooden desk for writing, and a lamp with a pull chain that clicked softly and satisfyingly. I unpacked cautiously, deliberately. Not due to lack of other destinations, but because each item I placed was a statement, a memory I held onto, a fragment of me I reclaimed. For years, I dwelled in a home where I navigated discussions silently, digested discontent, and minimized myself for the sake of tranquility. In this place, I could breathe freely. On the initial night, I resumed work on an abandoned sketchbook, one that hadn't seen my hand since prior to Brielle's engagement. I omitted capturing the wedding, avoided depicting the ballroom or Cariss's moment when she branded me a stranger. Instead, I sketched the lake, the bent lines of the shoreline, a father and daughter, their figures outlined by twilight, both clutching fishing rods. No faces were depicted. Only stance and proximity were conveyed. Since the upheaval, I hadn't interacted with Brielle. Marcus had phoned again, but I allowed it to reach voicemail. I no longer felt anger. I wasn't even anticipating. I was merely stationary. In stillness, I was educating myself. This stillness offered its own kind of recovery. Each morning, I ventured forth. I had previously overlooked the pleasant aroma that enveloped the world at 7 a.m. As the sun gently warmed the pavements, I began greeting those I encountered. An old gentleman with a corgi adorned in a bow tie, a barista named Lena who prepared an impeccable cappuccino and addressed me as Sir, as if I were royalty. I was unnoticed in the best sense. No demands, no borders to accommodate. Every Saturday, I discovered a weekend sketching course tucked away in the cellar of a local arts community hub. Primarily attended by retirees and ambitious high school students expanding their portfolios, I rarely engaged in conversation. Instead, I would simply draw with pencil on paper, layer upon layer, creating a unique, uninterrupted rhythm. One day, Miles made an appearance, arriving with a bottle of scotch and a sense of guarded admiration. He leisurely explored the minimalistic apartment setting and admired my framed sketches. "You all right?" he inquired. "Improving," I replied. He nodded his understanding. He lingered for an hour, during which we swapped tales from our college days and shared a few insignificant laughs. It was rejuvenating, as if discarding an old persona and rediscovering the sensation of my own existence. I avoided Brielle's social media feeds and refrained from inquiring about the resolution of the honeymoon debacle or the quality of photos despite the missing quartet. If images were posted, I chose not to see them. I had no desire to witness smiles that excluded me. Her prolonged silence persisted, and I respected it. She possessed my contact details, my recollections. The rest was in her hands. One day, while passing by the marina, I witnessed a child instructing her father on how to skip stones. The girl became annoyed when her stones plopped instead of skipped. "It's all right," the father comforted, sitting beside her. "Even the ones that plop matter," he said. That statement resonated with me. Because I had plopped, I'd fallen out of their story, a disturbance too loud, too untimely. Yet, I still mattered. I understood this now. I wasn't anticipating their narrative to alter. I was embarking on my own journey. Recovery came in unconventional bursts. Not grandiose or dramatic, but brief instances. Selecting my own groceries, enjoying jazz music undisturbed, drawing for hours without being interrupted by someone else's turmoil, these moments brought solace. I no longer needed to fix things anymore. I was no longer essential. But for the first time, this wasn't a source of pain, it was reassurance. I'd spent my prime years catering to people who valued me solely by what I could offer. Now, I was self-sufficient. People claim healing resembles forgiveness. For me, it seemed like tranquility, the silent scratch of a pencil on paper, the quiet turn of a key in a door that only I crossed, and solitude yet not loneliness. In this void, I started recalling who I was prior to my desperate yearning for recognition. I didn't anticipate another word from Brielle. Truthfully, not entirely. Weeks had elapsed, perhaps a month. I stopped tallying after the second Sunday passed without her contact. I didn't hate her. That would have been simpler in some aspects. Hatred provides a niche for pain. However, what I felt ran deeper, emptier. It was like standing in a corridor of closed doors, realizing they wouldn't open for me again. I reasoned she'd chosen her path, that perhaps I was merely a milestone she had outgrown. On some days, I even convinced myself of this. Then arrived the message. The message was brief, straightforward, and void of excuses. No sections, just a query. "Can we talk?" I pondered over it for nearly 5 minutes, not due to uncertainty about the response, but because her question took more bravery than I anticipated. Perhaps it signified something. Maybe she had started acknowledging the wreckage in her new life's margins. Perhaps she now noticed the chair I once sat on, the voice that no longer responded when she called, the void where responses used to be. An hour passed before I replied. Same cafe by the lake. Saturday. 10 I didn't ask if she'd be solo. I didn't inquire about her discussion points. I didn't guarantee a warm welcome. But I did agree to meet. Regardless of everything, she was still my daughter, not biologically or legally so, depending on the document you consulted. However, in the way that truly mattered, I had nurtured her and cherished her. Perhaps, barely, there remained a fragment of that love within her as well. The crisp, wind-whispered Saturday morning arrived. Arriving 10 minutes ahead, since it signifies importance, I was dressed in a gentle gray sweater under my coat, not the kind for church or formal gatherings, but the one that makes you feel like yourself. I purchased coffee and waited at a table by the window, offering the finest view of the water. We'd always sit there when she was young, after her swimming lessons, with damp hair and rosy cheeks from chlorine and laughter. At 10:04 sharp, she arrived alone, without makeup or dramatic attire. Her hair was pulled back in a style reminiscent of the girl I once prepared lunches for. Spying me promptly, she moved towards me without hesitation, though her shoulders bore the tension of nerves. I remained seated, merely looking up and nodding once. "Hello, Dad," she whispered softly, settling into the seat facing me. The word "daddy" almost broke me. Despite all the pain, the silence, and the choices that caused me more harm than she could comprehend, that word still resonated as genuine. "I wasn't certain you'd come," she admitted, her voice icy. "I wasn't sure you'd ask," I responded. We sat in a tense silence for a while, a pause heavy with unspoken words. Then she looked up and I saw tears glistening. She didn't try to wipe them away but let them fall. "I didn't know what Mom was doing," she confessed. I could sense something was wrong, but I didn't think she stopped herself. "I didn't think you wouldn't be here. You didn't realize I wasn't invited?" I asked softly, not accusatory, but honest. She shook her head. I thought the arrangements were finalized. I asked if everything had been set up properly. She said it was. I nodded slowly. She said many things. Brielle leaned forward, her hands tightly clasped. Dad, I should have checked. I wish I had. Her voice faltered, revealing the extent of her revisions. I hadn't suspected she was altering things so significantly. I assumed you were merely silent. I admitted I was, but not voluntarily. She visibly wilted. Why didn't you contact me? Share what was happening? A deep sigh escaped me. Because by the time I recognized how far it had progressed, it wasn't about your ignorance. It was about your obliviousness. She turned her gaze to the window then, as the wind outside rustled the tree branches. I saw you on the periphery and didn't draw you back, she murmured softly. No, I replied. You didn't. We remained in silence, allowing the tension to fill the space between us. No one attempted to conceal it. That's how I knew we had a chance, because this time there were no deceptions to soften the impact. Eventually, she delved into her bag and retrieved something. A velvet box. She moved it toward me slowly across the table. I paused before opening it, my eyes falling upon the watch. My father's, my grandfather's, the one I had intended to present to you before everything fell apart. She stated, I discovered it in the drawer. Following the wedding, I recognized its identity. I recalled the narrative. I recollected your promise that I would receive it upon starting my own family. I remained silent, instead focusing on her. I apologize, Father, she said, for not recognizing you, for allowing her to make you feel unseen. I gave a slow nod, then closed the box and gently moved it back towards the table. No, I replied. That was never mine to retain. I obtained it for you. I still wish you to possess it. Not because I forget what transpired, but because I remember everything that preceded. Her lip trembled, tears trickling down again, this time without concealment. I don't know how to rectify this, she whispered. You don't need to repair it, I said. You merely need to mean it. She nodded. I do, and I believe her. I did not leave with her. I didn't accept Sunday dinners or promises of a fresh start. Some hurts take time, but when I departed the cafe that day, I no longer felt like a spirit. I felt as if I were truly acknowledged, understood. She embraced me outside, holding firm, her face against my shoulder, just as she often did before. As I departed, I recognized a sensation I hadn't experienced in months. I was no longer shouldering the burden on my own. She took a portion of it. Perhaps, merely perhaps, this was sufficient.